Hello, welcome again to another episode in this week's economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. Thank you for joining me today. You can find this on YouTube or any of your other major platforms that are out there where you get your podcast. So please subscribe, like it, rate it, share with your friends. I would greatly appreciate it. And it really helps me out a lot. So thank you so much. And I appreciate you listening. The next thing I want to mention is the Let People Prosper show on Tuesday was fantastic. It was with Patrick Gleason from Americans for Tax Reform. We talked about the state flat tax revolution and how that's going across all the many states across the economy. It needs to be more, but we'll see how that goes. And then also the Responsible State Budget Project that I'm working with them on. And it's a great opportunity for us to have more responsible budgeting in every state. This upcoming Tuesday for the Let People Prosper show is another great discussion with Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who we talk about the COVID-19 pandemic. What was the causes? What happened during it? What were some of the failures? And what we should learn from it moving forward. So I really hope you'll check out both of those and all of them really, and share them along the way. So without further ado, though, let's get into some more of the other discussion that's happening. So on the first thing I want to talk about on the national front today was a new Pew poll, so a poll by Pew that talked a lot about, different things. The question that I looked at from Chris Edwards, who's over at Cato Institute, he tweeted about this on June 21st. Today's June 22nd, 2023. When you look at this particular question, the percent who say each of the following is a very big problem in the country today, it shows you, and I'll put this in the show notes as well. It has where it's Democrat or lean Democrat versus Republican or lean Republican. For those who think about inflation, right, it was 65% of the total. That was the number one thing on people's minds. Still, even as it went down to 4%, right, which is still pretty hot, you still have a lot of that's on people's minds. 77% are Republican or lean Republican. That was their number one thing. Or if you're a Democrat or lean Democrat, it was 52%. So more than half of either one of those from those political parties. The next one was the affordability of healthcare, which got 64%. That was still more than half for both of them. The Democrats were at 73%. The Republicans were at 54%. The ability of Democrats and Republicans to work together was the next one at 62% total. And that was actually almost deadlocked at 62% for Democrats, 63% for Republicans. People were really concerned about them not working together. Drug addiction was next. Gun violence was then after that, which a wide span from 81% for Democrats and 38% for Republicans. So violent crime was the next one. The federal budget deficit was up there in the top 10. Glad to see that. That's a major issue that I've talked a lot about, and we need to have more concern. 56% of Americans in total, 72% of Republicans are concerned about it, only 39% of Democrats. But that is etching up, though. So let's hopefully that will continue. Again, it goes to show that inflation, deficits, the cost of healthcare, these things are really on people's minds. And so that's good to know from my perspective, because that's what I talk a lot about, as you know. And so there needs to be more of a focus on that. On June 21st, I was on Fox Business with Neil Cavuto on Coast to Coast. Had a good discussion there about what's going on in the marketplace, what's happening with interest rates, but the target interest rate by the Fed, what Jerome Powell is doing there. Really a lot of stuff that I've talked about here. Had the opportunity to be on Fox Business, which is always great. And I'll put that in the show notes page as well. In general, my talk was that there have been a lot of government failures, whether it be the fiscal side, the shutdowns, and then ultimately the money creation by the Federal Reserve that has created all this monetary pressure that's out there. And even though, yes, we have had some disinflation from 9% down to 4% now, that's still about double what the Federal Reserve would like for it to be. And even Jerome Powell is out talking now that, look, they're expecting to continue to raise rates. The Fed's projection is to have it at close to 6% by the end of the year. So that would create about probably three more rate hikes by the end of the year at 25 basis points each. So that's something that we want to continue to watch. But one thing that's also interesting, and Michael Strain from American Enterprise Institute tweeted about this, I also put this in the show notes page, is that, he says that the Fed's work is not done. Financial conditions have not tightened relative to 12 months ago. The financial conditions are considerably looser than they were in the fall of 2022, and they have been trending looser since May of 2023. And so this is kind of interesting. You have these, the financial condition index, and it's continuing to show that, no, it's not actually tight right now, that it continues to be looser over time, even as we have higher interest rates. And the reason why is because we had so much money creation in the economy. Yes, the balance sheet is coming down some about 6% by the Fed over the last year. Yes, M2, measure money supply, is down about 5%, but you got to look at what's happening in the financial conditions, as there's been so much liquidity added out over the last couple of years that there's just tons of money and liquidity that's available. And so the financial conditions aren't really that strained, which indicates to me that they will go out and continue to raise interest rates and hopefully more aggressively cut their balance sheet. And I've been calling for that to more than double the rate they are now. Instead of 6%, year over year rate, we should be at 12, further, more than that, to really get control of inflation and get rid of a lot of the distortions that are happening throughout the economy. Yes, that will lead to a harder landing, but I think it's needed. It's necessary given how much we've been propped up over the last couple of years. And we've also seen other central banks across the globe continue to raise their interest rates, their target interest rate. The ECB did 50 basis point increase there. Turkey did, right? They hiked their interest rate to 15% in a dramatic U-turn to tackle 40% inflation. The ECB, the European Central Bank, also raised their interest rate here recently. So you're seeing all these interest rates that are going up. And what that does is it means that you're probably going to have a depreciation sum of the dollar, at least for a short period of time. As if you have an investment, where would you want to put your money? Where you get a higher rate of return or a lower rate of return? Higher rate of return, of course, right? So you sell off your dollars, you buy the euro, or you buy the pound or something else, and then that weakens the dollar in the process, which also means that it's more costly for us to import those products that we've been importing as well, which contributes to higher inflation in the process. And so there is a domino effect that happens here, where I think it was probably a mistake for the Fed to pause right now, given the conditions that are going on. And so this could be an even worse situation down the road. We'll see. I'll keep an eye on it and keep you informed. On the state level, though, we had the State Employment and Unemployment Summary Report put out by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics last Friday on June 16th. And look, it says that unemployment rates were lower in May in 11 states and stable in 39 states. The national unemployment rate rose by 0.3 percentage points over the month to 3.7, but was little change from May of 22 over the last year. Non-farm payroll employment increased in 5 states and was essentially unchanged in 45 states. But again, when you look at the unemployment rates, you're continuing to see they stay really low at 3.7% across the United States. California ticked up to 4.5%. Texas ticked up to 4.1%. Both of those have been coming up some here recently, especially as the labor force continues to grow, at least in Texas, but even in California as well, as people are joining back into the labor force. We may see more of this happening as a lot of the emergency declaration, when you had the social safety nets, how you couldn't get off of Medicaid, and some of the other programs were increased, like SNAP and TANF, right? Some of that is going away now. So there's more incentive for people to go back to work. So we might see that the unemployment rate starts to continue to tick up over time as people, can't find a job right away. So that's something for us to continue to watch as we go forward there. Over the month, Texas had the most jobs added, 51,000, which is a 0.4% increase in May. For California, they were number 2 at 47,300, but only at 0.3% month over month. Utah had the highest month over month change of 0.5%. It was 8,500, but they've got a much smaller labor force than, places like Texas or California. Over the last year, Texas, again, led the way with having 529,800 jobs added over the last year. Which is a 4% growth rate, the highest in the nation. If you look at California, they increased by 427,500, which was second place, but they also have the highest number of people that were employed in the economy. And so their growth rate was only 2.4%. Florida was up there pretty high as well, more free market oriented economy. They had 346,600 jobs, 3.7% growth rate. Georgia was the one that added 118,000 at 2.5% year over year. So a lot of these states are continuing to grow, especially those that practice more free market, conservative fiscal policies and that sort of thing. What we've also seen in Texas alone is that since February 2020, before the pandemic, you've had a lot of states that still haven't added all their jobs back, especially in blue states. But Texas has added more states, continues to set records. They've added 25% of all the jobs that have been added since the pandemic started. If you add in Texas and Florida, it's about 42%. So nearly half all the jobs that have been added have just been in those 2 states. Quite remarkable given what we've seen over the last few years. And I'll put that in the show notes page as well. The other thing on the states is that Texas, and I've talked a lot about Texas as their session ended, but I had a post that I put up at vanceginn.com that talks about how this is the largest budget increase in Texas history. And it is. And I kind of go through, what the different factors are. I talk about how the Legislative Budget Board, where they look at spending to appropriations, how that's apples to oranges comparison, because they'll show that the general revenue change was only 10.5%, which still, this is over bienniums. We have 2-year budget cycles. All funds change was 5.9%. So one could argue, as Governor Greg Abbott said recently, that the budget was below population growth and inflation. Their measure of population inflation, which uses population times inflation of the last 2 fiscal years and the upcoming 2 years, the average of those growth rates of 12.3%, these would be below that 10.5% of GR and all change of 5.9. The problem is that measures apples and oranges, spending at the end of one period to appropriations at the beginning of the next period, which are likely to grow. They usually always do by the end of that period. And so that is not a good way to measure what's happening there, because what they did was they just spiked up how much was being spent in the previous biennium. And then that raised the base to grow on the next period for their spending limit, right? And how much they could spend. And so a better way is to look at appropriations to appropriations. So I've done this 2 ways in this blog post where I have 2 charts. One of those is looking at from the conservative Texas budget approach, where you exclude from the previous biennium of 22-23 the one-time COVID relief money from the federal government of about $13.3 billion, and any property tax relief that was provided, or tax relief in general, because that's not going to grow government. And that was about $6.2 billion. So about $20 billion excluded from that budget to not growing government and things that shouldn't exist later by the COVID money. And then you look at the 2024-25 budget of how much they at least put in the budget. Not all of this has been passed for property tax relief yet, but you had $5.3 billion for old relief to maintain what happened in the past, and $12.3 billion that for new relief, that's, compression or homestead exemption, whatever they decide, they need to do it all for compression. But there's still this debate that's happening, and there's kind of this stalemate that's continuing to go on there. But when you do that, that brings the total to $303.7 billion. So the $245.3 billion to $303.7 billion is a $58.5 billion increase in the overall budget. Massive increase there in the all funds. And that's a 23.8% increase. If you just look at the state funds change, so exclude federal funds, it increased by $41 billion. Now was a 25.8% increase, well above that 12.3% growth rate that they've used as population times inflation. And if you look at population plus inflation just for the last 2 years, which I've used in the past for the conservative Texas budget, it was a 16% growth rate in population inflation. So both of these measures, the state funds or all funds, are well above 20% growth rates and well above the average taxpayer's ability to pay for government spending as measured by population growth plus inflation. And this also means that there has been a closer record between what's happened over the last 5 budgets, between initial appropriations, a growth of a biennium of 8.9% to population plus inflation of 9.5%. So it's still below, but it's not as far below as it was before this major, massive increase, the largest spending increase in Texas history. But another way to look at this is that, look, the budget shouldn't be growing at all. They've already been spending too much over time. There's a lot more higher taxes that have been on Texans. And so you look at a frozen budget, you look at that sort of metric and say, look, what if the budget didn't grow at all? If it's going to grow at all, right? Maybe it shouldn't even grow. And you have everything included for property taxes, the COVID relief, and everything else. Those numbers for all funds was $264.8 billion to $321.3 billion, a $56.5 billion increase, or a 21.3% increase there. But if you look at just state funds change, it was $166.3 billion to $219.1 billion. That's a $52.8 billion increase in the budget. 31.7% increase in state funds. This is why I've called it the largest increase in Texas history, especially in dollar terms, but I think even in percent terms too, if you go further back than what I've done. But even over the last 10, 20 years, this is certainly the largest whenever you look at either one of those. So this is why I've been saying, look, Texas is turning more into California when it comes to the budget than the free market bastion of hope and prosperity that we've known in Texas. And so this has really got to change. And it was also the largest increases in corporate welfare, massive increases there, and also in social safety nets. That's a form of welfare. So this is just a bad budget overall. It's really unfortunate. And they didn't even pass property tax relief. So there's a lot of things that to be asked for in this session. And that special session is going on now. And then the other part that I like to talk about in the third section of today's episode is that I presented to the Military Order of the World Wars, their Southwest Leadership Conference at Schreiner University in Kerrville, Texas. This is my 9th year to present to this group, and it's a group of top-notch high school students from across the state of Texas that they have to apply and everything else. And so they go through a 5-day course where they stay there on campus. It used to be at the USS Lexington, which was great. And they go through a lot about civil society, economics, just really learning more about our country and being good patriots overall. And I teach them about capitalism versus socialism. Capitalism's the means of ownership are controlled by people. The capital ownership by the controlled by government, is really socialism. And so, and go through the differences between the two. And the way that I bring this to life, though, and it is an interactive game of the minimum wage game that I do, where some are employees, some are employers. I have them negotiate, given a reservation wage, what they would want to work for. And it's really great. Like they go around the room and they're talking and negotiating, and you really start to see the light bulbs come on. And a lot of times what I'll do is before the game, I'll say, look, how many of you think we should have a minimum wage? Like all the kids raise their hand. How many of you think we should raise the minimum wage? Probably half the kids at least will raise their hand. And then after it's over with, I'll get more, probably less than half that will say we need to raise the minimum wage. So that's an improvement. And some of them will raise their hand and say we shouldn't need a minimum wage at all. And minimum wage is a form of socialism, right? It's a control in the marketplace. Yes, it's not ownership of means of capital, but it is a means of control of labor. We often talk about capital, but I think we've also got to talk about labor when we're talking about socialism. And it creates less freedom for people to be able to negotiate in the marketplace for employers and employees. If you can't get that job, if you could potentially have had it below the minimum wage, and that creates the black market, underground economy, illegal immigration, all these other problems that we can see out there because of the minimum wage. So what that means is we don't want to judge a policy by its intentions, but by its results. And the results of the minimum wage are not good. And so I want to leave it there today. We've talked about a lot of things. Please go out and subscribe. And until next time, have a prosperous day.